Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Um it gives me immense pleasure to moderate this session on solar energy in India. Solar, as we all know, is the most promising technology as of now of renewable energy. EY, Ernst& Young, actually does a worldwide ranking of various renewable technologies and how the countries are faring in that respect. So I'm very happy to state that India ranks number one actually in the last year in terms of solar capacity addition policies framework. So I think India has been really doing a lot of work in solar, and we obviously have a huge capacity addition target that we have laid down for ourselves. Um, Having said that, we've all seen in the recent past that the solar tariffs through competitive bidding processes have been coming down significantly. In some cases, questions have been raised about whether they are sustainable, not sustainable, whether those projects are realistic, not realistic. But we've been seeing capacity addition happening on the ground, in some cases not as per the speed that was originally envisaged, but still nevertheless, it's happening. uh, you know DISCOMs continue to be key buyers of grid scale solar as of now, and also in terms of the distributed technologies, at least for sale of solar power, banking, etc. So there are issues with some DISCOMs, not all, which developers have been facing. So there are still some concerns, apprehensions around that. Obviously, this scale of solar that we're talking about requires huge financing. So, where will all that financing come from? Do we need some special instruments, bonds, or do we need some special funding mechanisms? That's another area that has to be deliberated. Uh, Another thing clearly is that solar is not enough. We need round the clock power. That's the concept for now. So how do we combine solar with storage, whether it's battery storage or pump storage? How do we offer round the clock power? And we've seen a lot of bids from SECI, etc., which are being coming are for round the clock power. So that's another thing that has to be considered. Also, we see space constraints in certain cases in certain states. So how do we alleviate that situation? How do we look at mitigating the challenges faced or posed by space constraints? Do we look at new technologies which require minimal space, bifacials, or along horizontal, vertical, whichever way? So what can we do in terms of further R&D on solar technologies? And also we see a lot of corporates moving towards decarbonization, in terms of their commitment to the environment, in terms of achieving net zero targets, and they themselves are looking at procuring solar power. However, in certain cases, we have seen that there are issues of open access. Whether it has been 1 megawatt, which has been brought down by regulation to 100 kilowatt, but in many states it's still not been operational to the extent that was desired. Probably it's just a matter of time. So most corporates are moving towards solar. Where do they get it from? How do we enable that they succeed in that journey? It's easy for them to actually start buying green power from solar, etc. So there are whole host of considerations that we need to give for actually adopting solar at mass scale. uh, I'm very happy and very privileged to state that I have a very esteemed panel with me today to deliberate on all these issues. I will not take any more time and move over to my panelists. Uh, I think if my panelists are okay, we'll do for a round of question answers, probably two if time allows, and then open the floor to for any question and answers. So So I would like to start with Mr. Bhargava. I think you've been at the helm of one of the largest public sector companies in India, and we've known each other personally for a long time. So, so if I was to start, if you can give your overall perspective on how do you see this landscape evolving, what do you see, the role of government in particular to enable large-scale adoption of solar, and how do you also see private sector coming along in this direction? So, your overall remarks on the sector, if we can start with.
Good morning and thank you, Somesh. Thanks, Blue Circle, for having me here. You said I head the largest public sector. No, I don't head the largest public sector. I head the renewables vertical at that public sector. So it's my job at NTPC to spearhead the energy transition from what we are today to where we want to reach in the next 10 years. So in terms of simple numbers, NTPC operates today about 71 gigawatts of installed capacity, primarily coal, out of which only 3 gigawatts is VRE, as we say, variable renewables, and about another 2.5 gigawatts of hydro. So that means the target which we set for ourselves is to do 60 gigawatts of renewables capacity by 2032. So we have 10 years to reach a stage where NTPC will probably have a renewable capacity which is almost as large in size as the coal-based capacity we have today. So that's the step one. If I may say so, this is probably one of the largest energy transition exercises by any company, I'm sure in India definitely, and maybe among the global ones also. I can't speak about the Chinese companies I know, but so by and large, this is something which we're trying to do, and that mantle is on me. You mentioned about solar. Solar definitely is the key piece in India's RE journey. We all have heard government set out plans that by 2030, the non-fossil capacity has to be about 500 gigawatts. And as I understand, about 450 odd would come from renewables. That's about 300 gigawatts of solar, about 120 odd gigawatt of wind, and then small hydro and biomass and so on and so forth. So solar will remain, is probably already the largest piece when we talk about the 170 odd gigawatts of RE capacity. Solar at around 60 gigawatts remains the largest piece of what we are doing today. And this will continue to be so because India is endowed with large pieces of land and India is endowed with very good solar radiation. So that becomes the most go-to way of doing things. Government has been at the forefront. I mean, if I can quickly talk about how it started, maybe in 2012, you can correct me. Yeah, I think 2011 or 12, when one of our subsidiaries, NVVN, was roped in to do the bidding, tariff-based bidding. And the first round of bids, if you guys remember, was around, I think, 15.5 rupees, which NVVN is still operating, and thankfully people are paying. So that's the thing. But from there, we have actually come down to 2.5 rupees. One thing which has happened is that it did go down to below 2 rupees. We are the guys who actually bid that number for Gujarat. And we are still in the process of developing that project. So to answer your question, yes, many of those projects which we bid out at really low numbers did get impacted by a couple of things. We all know about COVID, then of course the supply chain issues with China. So all those things, but we are still committed to doing that project. And with the time extension given by the government recently, we hope to complete those projects in the next 8 to 9 months. But what we see now is that this number has actually moved up and probably settled at something around 270, 280, which probably appears to be a much more reasonable number, both from the developer perspective as well as the buyer perspective. Of course, buyer can always wish for a much lower number as a DISCOM. They have every right to wish for a low number. So some of the key challenges which we see on the solar side, since we are discussing solar in this session, remain land availability is obviously an issue. Connectivity is also an issue. But probably the biggest challenge which we are facing today is availability of modules. And in spite of the fact that the domestic manufacturing has picked up pace, if I understand the headline number is about 20 gigawatts of module capacity, The problem is that it's just module capacity. So they bring cells and make modules. So we are still dependent on, of all the places, China to import our cells because that's the lowest cost and the most easily available thing. So in terms of really converting this opportunity in as to how we can bring down the cost, so the government's efforts in PLI actually have created that push, but we understand that it'll take at least 2 years before these capacities hit the market. Probably we understand only then we'll be able to get over our dependence on imported materials, whether it's polysilicon or wafer or cells, and have a much more independent pricing mechanism, which should be reflective. Because today the pricing mechanism is not reflective of what actually is the cost. It's dependent on whatever is the cost of cell in China and so on and so forth. So that's a major challenge, and that's also been one of the reasons when I mentioned supply chain. That was also one of the reasons why we were not able to move as quickly as we can. Because government, for example, came out with a CPSU scheme in which we were one of the largest winners in terms of capacity. Even the domestic DCR modules, wherein the cell and module both have to be manufactured in India, that capacity is also very limited. So we're actually struggling to complete those projects. Out of about 2,000 odd which we won, we are still left with about 150 odd to complete, which we hope to do in the next 2 months. So these are the challenges on the solar side. But the important part, I believe, is that SECI has done, of course, a great job. But what we're seeing now is that many states are also quite clear as to what they want. And I don't know whether you guys tracked that. About a month and a half ago, Maharashtra came out with a bid where they looked at peak power. What they said was that I want 6 hours of peak dispatchable power. And you set up solar plant, but you have to give me dispatchable power. So the movement towards from plain vanilla solar or wind is now actually moving towards what the states want. And that's actually the right thing. Because we have been thinking that, of course, I'm part of the central government machinery as well, indirectly as a central government PSU. So we tend to assume that we know best. But what actually is happening on the ground is more important. The states know what they want. And it's actually much better for them to come out with the bids. So Maharashtra bid, incidentally, we won that bid. About 250 megawatts of peak power supply. I think that's one of the important steps in the right direction as to how the landscape of bidding will evolve. Probably doing plain vanilla solar and wind may or may not find so much traction. We feel peak power bids or the RTC bid. Personally, I feel that this bid was better than RTC because RTC is again forcing the state or the DISCOM to take liability for an entire capacity which they may or may not want. If you track these states, many of them are already compliant on the RPO side, or they have committed to take so much power. And they don't need so much more RE power. So I think that direction is also happening. So I think I need to stop here.
No,
maybe
please, so you have all the time if you want.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
So like you said, we'll do one round of questions,
sure.
maybe second round. So
Sure.
thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So very clear. I think you rightly said that I think NTPC was the one to bring down the tariff below 2 at a point in time, and then it's been hovering around 2.5, etc. So still significant improvement from 15 to 2.5. But glad to hear that you're honoring the commitments of what was happened at that stage. So just picking on one of the points that you mentioned, sir, that availability of modules remains the biggest challenge. Module cells, and obviously we were not the early starters in manufacturing that in India, so we are still relying on China and imports quite a bit. So moving on to Mr. Verma from there, sir, how do you see going from this stage now further on in terms of domestic manufacturing? Mohit sir also mentioned about the PLI scheme but not being adequate. So how do you see what we can do to enable domestic manufacturing and better availability of modules, cells? You're leading one of the largest private sector solar companies. So how do you view that ecosystem evolving? What can be done more, sir? So some remarks on that.
So thank you, Somesh, and thank you, Mr. Bhargava, for setting the context there. I'm Colonel Narendra Verma. I am the Chief Operating Officer of CleanMax. You know CleanMax is one of the leading players in C&I sector. We've been doing solar, but now we have moved on to hybrid. So while we speak about solar today, we need to also remember that the industry is actually now moving more towards hybrid now. So when we talk of solar, standalone solars, maybe in gigawatt scale, solar parks may be there. But when we look at C&I sector, it is the hybrid probably that's going to call the day. And that's where when we talk later on the space and the land and those complications that I'll cover. But looking at the supply side, the point that what we are trying to discuss out here, I think let's plainly look at the numbers. Today, even if we go by the target that the Indian government has taken on about 280 gigawatt by 2030, we would probably require to install about 27 gigawatt of solar every year. And it's only in the last couple of years that we have still not reached that scale of installation so far. I think the max we have done is about 20 gigawatt. And it's all been purely import based. Now look at the reality. In India, the manufacturing base, as the number that I understand, is approximately about 10 gigawatt today. And out of 10 gigawatt, 4 gigawatt is probably Adani. And they either do self-consumption or they export. So that modules are in any case not available to the Indian market. And then there are other players, Vari and so many others who have about half gigawatt, 1 gigawatt, Tatas. So, and then the pricing point of view, today still we are not competitive with what's available in the market from China. And I think we understand what the government is trying to do, by putting some trade barriers to encourage domestic manufacturing. And domestic manufacturing is important to India on a strategic. Today, we are almost 100% dependent on China. And I think that's not a good position for a country like India with such a massive energy requirements and the commitments that what we have towards going green and net zero. We need to have our own domestic manufacturing. There's no doubt about that. But the methodology that's being done here, I think, is something we probably should be discussing. I hope we are not driving a Ferrari with handbrakes on. Well, we want to probably go fast. We want to reach somewhere in massive scales. But are we throttling it? I think the timing is very important. And the methodology to be adopted has to be calibrated with what is the current demand supply requirement. When we ambitions of 27 gigawatt per year, you need modules for 27 gigawatt. They're not going to come out of thin air anywhere. Either India manufactures it or we get it from somewhere. Otherwise, we can't be looking at one target in isolation and then ignoring the other target, and finally nothing is going to come out of it. So my recommendation on this, and what we generally been discussing among our peers, is to have a calibrated approach on this. Look at what you need, and the final goal is to have renewable power projects completed as per the target, so that we meet our green goals, we meet our commitments to our own country and to the international community outside. Let the panels be there. And then gradually probably create a percentage. Okay, we can say this year we will have 20% Indian panels compulsorily put, and which kind of meets the supply requirements. So whatever is the supply, we take all that supply, and at the other end we encourage increasing the manufacturing capacity, which in case the government is doing, through various subsidies to establish the panel. But another thing which we really need to understand, when we talk about panel manufacturing, what do we mean by that? Is it assembling the modules? Is it making cells? Or it is starting from zero, creating those ingots and then cutting the wafers and then doing the cells? If we still import the ingots and the wafers from China and only cut them into cells here, we are not going whole hog into it. And we'll continue to be dependent on China. Because what's happened even recently now, they have increased the prices of the wafers. While we want to curtail on the panels, there's okay, let the wafers be more expensive. So I think this is a very complex stuff, but the simple solution is to be probably more calibrated about how we go about it. And in the near future, I think let the projects happen, and we have a huge target. This 280 gigawatt is probably just to 2030 targets, and we surely have more than that. I think by that time, Indian industry has been resilient. We have big players, we have the money, we have the confidence of investors. I am sure we can do what is required to be done, but it's going to take time. And we need to be aware of that time factor. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Verma. I mean, you rightly said that this is not a problem which can be solved. It has not been solved for quite some time. So it is complicated and requires, multifaceted approach on that. Obviously, there is, always a question whether, we let the projects happen or we ensure that the manufacturing happens in India the most. And so, so you mentioned that what you've been discussing amongst the peer group is that we should follow a calibrated approach. So, one thought which comes to my mind, are you suggesting that, the trade barriers that we have, put or the government still puts on importing the modules, so those are removed for a certain period of time? Or, how does it happen? I mean, to enable the projects to happen.
I think it's just a matter of time. I see it that they will get removed.
Okay.
Because already you can see there has been a huge reduction in the kind of projects that are now seeing the light of the day. Right. Bids are there, people are not been able to execute. In C&I sector, our customers are really not getting the value. After all, the cost has to be passed on. Somebody has to pay for that cost. Nothing is free. There are no free lunches anywhere. So, but C&I still has some flexibility out there, and given the net zero targets, most of the corporates have now taken the money that is chasing these kind of projects. We may be able to make some headway into it, but surely that's not the right way to do it.
Right.
I would only say this. It's ultimately the money is coming from one pocket to another pocket of the government. Right. The government has to decide which pocket is more important today. Right. Government doesn't lose anything in this. Right. It's just, I think, an artificially created barrier, and artificially created barriers really don't work in time. It's the market dynamics that decide this.
Yeah, so possibly, instead of putting artificial barriers, or like you mentioned, maybe incentivizing domestic manufacturing will be better than increasing the cost by putting artificial barriers or imports. But, it's still not an easy problem to solve. It's, yeah. So, yeah, so if you want to come in on that, it will be good.
No, Somesh, it's not a question of incentivizing or otherwise. I think Mr. Verma made the point very well. Ultimately, what we need is capacity, and probably what also we need is affordable capacity. If I am going to set up solar plants which cost the moon, who's going to buy? Yeah. So we need to ensure that when we talk about a 500 gigawatt number or 280, as he says, there is enough capacity on ground, whether it's a C&I customer or distribution companies, or like, for example, NTPC is looking at merchant market, non-paper. So we are doing the entire gamut of things. But it's important that the number is right. Otherwise, affordability and reliability both are as important as anything else. So whether it's a domestic supplier or the international supplier, we definitely need to support the domestic supplier, but we also need them to compete openly. All these trade barriers were put in to ensure that they get a head start. It appears that they have not been able to match up to that level as of now. So what we understand, I think there have been announcements by the government that probably ALMM is going to be taken down for 2 years. So we're all waiting for that. So that will now allow competition on an open scale where the Indian participants as well as foreign suppliers can compete equally.
Rightly said, sir. So thank you for that. So moving on, let me bring Mr. Rutter in. So Mr. Rutter, you actually, you're part of one of the largest solar alliances, or the only one probably world over. So in terms of your opening remarks, any things that you see from your experience, some of the best practices which are happening world over, which India can adopt and benefit, in terms of its policies or incentivization framework or even manufacturing. So anything in that direction, your opening remarks on that, yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. So first I'd like to apologize on behalf of Dr. Mathur, who's traveling internationally. We are the International Solar Alliance. Secondly, I mean, I think there's a lot to be proud of in India. I think the direction from the top, Modi ji talking about solar, the National Solar Mission, it's very clear. I think the general framework that's been put in place is very strong. India is one of the top 3 countries, developing countries in the world in terms of solar installation. And the other 2 are Honduras and Vietnam, which actually do have some relevant lessons for India. And SECI is the envy of the world. I've been on a call where people in Nigeria are saying we need a SECI. And even NTPC, I think they need to move faster, which we can talk about. But having NTPC renewables as opposed to say PLN in Indonesia or ESCOM in South Africa, I think it's a real inspiring leadership example for the world. That said, I think there's a couple examples where India could be stronger. One is least cost resource power planning. So you have new coal plants being put in at 5.5, 6 rupees per kilowatt hour. While at the same time, we have this L1 mentality. And I think the L1 mentality is very toxic, where we say, NTPC bids 2, and then someone else bids 2.05. And even though that's much cheaper than coal, we say, no, we don't want your 2.05. And there was an RTC 3, I believe, where only 250 out of 2,500 got filled. So yeah, I think lessons from China, we talk about the Chinese manufacturing, and I think a lot of people have to remember that it ultimately came from demand. Last year, China built 60 gigawatts of solar, which is more than India's entire installed capacity to date. And so if you're a Chinese manufacturer, you have that confidence that you can set up a 20 gigawatt gigafactory for solar manufacturing. So I'd love to see, I think the demand is really the challenge right now. NTPC's target is 60 gigawatts by 2032. Well, today NTPC has a quarter of India's power. So if NTPC is going to continue to supply a quarter of India's power, they need to be doing 150 gigawatts by 2032. And with all due respect, I mean, then Mr. Bhargava sir is not setting that target. That target's coming from the top, right? And then if you had, say, 150 gigawatts by 2032, you had 10 gigawatts of solar a year, and maybe they say, okay, 5 gigawatts is going to be allocated toward domestic manufacturers. And so you have that 5 gigawatts, which is competitive, which gets the best price, and then you have 5 gigawatts, which supports domestic manufacturing. So I think if your demand is high enough, your demand is strong enough, you can have both. And your blended price will still be much cheaper than new coal. And I think that's what a lot of people forget, is that even if you add 20% to the cost of solar, it's still much cheaper than new coal. So I've got more comments, but we'll continue this discussion and keep going.
No, thanks a lot. One very interesting point that you made is that even if amongst the bids in terms of solar it's slightly costlier, it's still cheaper than other technologies, and of course the environmental aspects are there. So we should get more and more of that. Good, thank you so much. I would just move on to my next panelist. So, sir, you have been actually looking at, in terms of PTC, you actually the conduit between the supplier and the buyer in many cases. So, how do you see that landscape evolving, for solar particularly, both grid scale and, if there is any excess decentralized capacity which is available for offtake by DISCOMS or supply to DISCOMS. How do you see that landscape? Is that still a challenge? Is it really a challenge still, or it's made out to be more than what it is actually? So any opening comments on that? Yeah.
Thank you so much. As a representative of India's largest power trading utility, we are market makers. So when you say challenges, that is not the constraints under which we operate. All of these exist. We have to operate in the markets within those constraints. So to your point about offtake, yes, we are market makers. And since the conversation is restricted to solar, although we'll come to a point when we'll say only solar is not the right conversation to be had. Because somebody mentioned that the cost of solar is actually cheaper than coal. We beg to differ slightly. As in the case of coal, we might say that the carbon attribute is not priced correctly. In the case of solar, intermittency is also not priced correctly. So solar operates during the daytime. And India has a particular demand profile, and we all struggle with evening peaks. You can look at all the market data. And interestingly, if you plot the data from April of 2022 to January 31st, 2023, the weighted average, volume weighted average price of the GDAM segment is lower than that of the DAM segment. That's an interesting attribute. And if you look at who has contributed, it is the solar, which is priced lower. So when somebody wants to talk about solar and how it has to be off-taken, there are two elements to it. There is a reluctance from DISCOMs to increasingly, and you can look at it, the SECI bids. Somebody talked about SECI and how many bids they have accumulated, but how many PSAs are they going to execute? It's because the DISCOMs are reluctant to enter into long-term green PPAs.
Yeah.
So that's where role like a market maker's role comes in. So a market maker can actually go ahead and split the power into a green attribute and a brown power. So now the current Indian regulatory regime, there are issues, people talk about contract for differences or virtual power purchase agreements. But those are all structures that need to be enabled to actually get this offtake to happen. You split the power into a green attribute and a brown power and give it to a market maker. Let the market maker sell the brown power and sell the green attribute separately. And for example, the utility can enter into an optional agreement and pay and underwrite a certain tariff and take the green attribute completely. So the insurance premium is the green attribute and they can underwrite the tariff. That's one possible structure. That's why I'm saying there are opportunities, but these need to be enabled. This was on the utility scale side. This is one thing that can be done. A market maker can aggregate utility scale capacity supply and then try and sell it into the market, splitting those attributes. Coming to distributed energy resources. So again, DERs have different applications. So it's either a remote application in which the considerations are totally different. That's more about access. If we are talking about a different segment altogether, C&I. So today we have all this, you talked about green open access rule, 100 kilowatt. You still have cross-subsidy surcharges, additional surcharges, scheduling, wheeling. So the landed cost ends up at a place where it may be viable or it may not be viable. So again, India is not one market per se. All the different states have different markets and different regulations. And some places it works, some places it doesn't work. But again, I said, those are our operating environments and those are the constraints under which we work. But there are solutions. Limited, yes, but there are still opportunities.
No, I totally agree. As market makers, I think you are doing an excellent job. Similarly with NVVN, I think, I think you're right. I mean, India is not one market. So it's each state is a market in itself. And, there are different regulations, challenges. And, we talk of barriers, we talk of trade barriers and imports. There are, again, artificial barriers at the distribution level also. So in terms of buying of power or allowing open access or cross-subsidy charges, which are prohibitive in certain cases, actually. So those things have to be actually attacked to make this happen. It's not just about generating and coming up with capacity. How do you actually ensure that there are off-takers for that capacity is equally important. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that point. Now, there are 2-3 issues that I would like to discuss in particular. So not going to any panelists in particular. I'll just, highlight the issue and let the panelists, I think, respond. I think the first issue is around space scarcity. What do you see? What can be done around that? Do we need to come up with technological solutions to handle space scarcity, or is there another way to actually look at that? So, any comments from that on that? Maybe Mr. Verma.
Somesh, I think when we talk about space, let's understand what is the scale of that space. So if we typically today, depending on the tilt angles and the kind of modules that you use and tracker or non-tracker, let's take an average of over 2.5 acres per megawatt. Like today we are at between 2.3 to 2.7, depending on where it is, what latitude it is. So even if you take a 2.5 acre for calculation purpose, and every gigawatt, that means you're talking about 2,500 acres of land. And if you're looking at a target of 20,000, even 20 gigawatt per year, we are looking at 50,000 acres of land only for solar. I am taking the wind away, and wind has its own dynamics. And when you're talking about hybrid, the quality of land is equally important, because when we talk of hybrid, the solar has to be contiguous or it's part of the same project. And wind is not something that you can choose. Well, solar you can shift by kilometers left and right. Probably will make no difference to your IRRs, but in wind, even you can't shift a location by 100 meters left and right. So we are typically forced with a situation, especially now looking at which are the states which are currently going full hog on the renewable is, as we see it, is probably Gujarat, Karnataka today. And Rajasthan has almost stopped the wind, most of it. I think they're not doing anything. It's only the Seki part that some portion is now coming in, or ISTS projects are coming up there. Obviously, buying even 1 acre of land where there's an agriculture is a pain, to be very frank. And the revenue policies of different states are today not aligned towards developing a fast gestation project like a solar. Solar, you can start a project and finish the project in a couple of months. But the timeline to even convert the land from agricultural to a non-agricultural itself, in some states take 3 years. And in some states, it takes minimum 6 months through various stages of approvals. And practically, legally speaking, you can't even dig the land till you have an NA approval. But what the projects have to do is do concurrent activities and take risks on developing the projects while the approvals are in place, are actually in process. So I think the whole system really need to be seen in a holistic way. What reforms are required from in the revenue part of the processes when we have such projects coming up? And when we are looking at solar projects specifically, you need contiguous land. Even if I have to put 100 megawatt, I need about 300 acres of land, 250 to 300 acres. And if it's not contiguous, the cost effectiveness of that project deteriorates very rapidly. Because then you have so many extra boundary walls to be put, so many cablings to be done between them. Your sizing becomes more difficult. Your land use efficiency reduces drastically because a lot of land get wasted. You can't have those blocks and the tables really aligned well. And if you're in C&I sector where you got probably half a dozen or a dozen customer within 100 megawatt, it becomes more complex. But if it was one PPA, then probably it may be okay, but especially for people like CleanMax, it becomes even more complex. So I think we need to address it at both ends. One is on the policy front. How do we make the whole cycle time easier and better, keeping the interest of the farmers and the local community and the industry? And the second is, how do we encourage use of wasteland, especially like states where there's a lot of wasteland available, revenue land available, agricultural is not viable there. How do we encourage that? And I think the concepts of large solar farms being developed by the government and then the blocks being given to the industry, I think it's a good idea to do, like the Khavda in Gujarat and maybe some other stuff. That's surely a good way, but I think all states need to do something like this. It's not just very few states, is what I would say on this.
Good, sir. You've been
So I'd probably like to add a bit and maybe have a different point of view on some. But I think one of the points you asked was technology. So we'll come to that in a bit. Technology is definitely important because the way the land identification, allocation happens in quite a few states, the land records have been totally digitized, and which is actually a very good thing, which helps move things faster. But I think we also need to imagine, and I think, I don't know, one of us said that, or you only said that, we are not one grid. We are like 29 grids. Similarly, we are 29 states and union territories. So everyone has different set of rules. So we need to first accept that and move according to that. I'm sure you do the same. A lot of states have been progressive in terms of land allocation. Some states are still in the process of formulating the policies. Was also, if I may use the word disruptive, has been the ISTS charge waiver. As per the latest thing, June 2025 is when these charges will go away. Because what happened was that everyone started running to Rajasthan, Gujarat and Karnataka. Incidentally, many states have been approaching us, and I'm sure they do to you also, asking us to invest. But when we discuss the tariff number, they kindly step back and start taking a review because everyone feels, oh, the SECI bid, last bid was whatever that number was, and my number is almost 1 rupee higher than that. But I would believe that if hypothetically this June 2025 thing does happen, and which we hope will happen, lot of action will shift to states where they will probably look at consuming, because today no one is actually factoring in the cost of transmission. The X bus number for solar is 250, 260, or whatever that number is. But if you add the cost of transmission, the add cost of variability, that number is actually maybe 4 rupees, 4.5 rupees. You guys do the math much better than us in any case. Yeah, at least 4. So people are therefore very wary of moving into that 25-year PPA. So if things do move to states individually, I would believe a lot of these things will move away. What is happening today, Rajasthan has levied a Rajasthan Renewable Energy Development Fund cost. So which adds, so they are looking at monetizing whatever land they have, because they are not going to use the entire capacity. Something like that Gujarat is considering. I believe MP has already put in some Harit tax or whatever they call it. Karnataka is contemplating the same. So a lot of these disparities which are there today because of STS waiver will probably move out when things happen. In that case, once that happens, then the availability of land, I agree with you totally that states need to identify wastelands which can be then given away much easily. We are incidentally one of the guys who are doing the Khavda Park also. So that's, I must say that was a very good step taken by Gujarat, because that is land where there's no habitation and it could be handed over to us on day one. But similar things probably happen partly in Rajasthan, maybe in some places in Karnataka and AP. But we'll probably need a lot of such things. 300 gigawatts of solar and 120, 30 gigawatts of wind requires huge amount of land. And I'm still, you said 2.5 acres, actually it's, as far as we know, actually more than that. 2.5 acres doesn't make 1 megawatt. It's actually closer to 3.5, 4. So, and if you add all those, the inverters and the substation and so on and so forth. So, but obviously you guys are much more efficient. So probably you're making that happen. So the amount of land required is huge. The targets are huge. So we all have to get our act together. What we are definitely trying to do is we are talking to states. We got the park in Khavda. We are in discussions with Rajasthan. We are in discussions with Karnataka. I would say the difference between us and a C&I pure play, C&I supplier like CleanMax is that we look at much larger. So we are quite happy to do 10 gigawatts of park or 5 gigawatts of park or even 2 gigawatts of park at one place, because the economy of scale suits us. And the other thing which we are looking at also is not to wait for the PPA. I think this is a point you raised earlier, the role of government. So we feel that SECI bids has been the go-to way of adding capacity. But over the last 1 year or so, we have been very clear that that's not the only way. If we have to add capacity, I don't need to wait for a SECI bid or a Maharashtra bid. I am doing C&I, maybe we are at the beginning, you already have capacities on the ground. But C&I is one player. We are also looking very closely at the merchant market or the exchange. For example, today already we are selling about 125 megawatt worth of solar on the exchange. And the going has been good so far because the demand is there. But I understand maybe 4 years down the line, there will be a lot of surplus solar into the markets. We have to look and calibrate that approach. So the role of government, as we think in terms of building the market, a friend from PTC said the market maker. I beg to differ. Market is not made by the exchange or the trading guys. Market is made when the generators or the buyers come into play. Come what may, you may try. If both the people don't find value in what is happening. Yes, the platform, I think one of our guys from IEX is here. One of our friends from IEX is there. So you provide a platform. If you are able to sell, you can come with the products, definitely. But if we are able to provide the supply and there is a demand, then only the market happens. And so that's how it goes. So we feel that it's not SECI or any state bids which will drive the market. Going forward, it will be bids which are not, or capacities which are not focused on these bids alone, which will probably create the market.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit on the technology side. So, and absolutely agreed. 2,000 gigawatts of solar we could build on 1% of India's land. And there's 48% of India's land is wasteland. So the absolute amount of land is not the problem. It's this conversion issue. It's the conversion, it's the local regulations, it's the local stakeholders' engagement. That said, there's a lot of work on agri-PV around the world. At the NICE campus where I work, they've got this great installation of these vertical solar panels. So there's certain crops that can be grown that actually effectively have too much sun, and so would actually benefit from some partial shading. That's certainly an option that should be explored, but you need to allow that on agricultural land. You need to say agricultural land can have some amount of solar on it and still be considered agricultural land. Another one is floating solar, which NTPC is a leader in. And again, this toxic L1 mentality. Floating solar is slightly more expensive, but the reduced evaporation means it may actually be better for India as a whole. But if that benefit's not accounted for, just like the ISTS means that the transmission's not accounted for. Finally, there's rooftop solar. You look at Dadri, which is an NTPC plant. There's slightly worse solar radiation than in Rajasthan, and because of ISTS, it doesn't make sense. But the transmission is there, the circuit breakers are there, the transformers are there. It's close to Delhi from a system stability perspective, and so maybe putting solar in Delhi might make sense. So rooftop solar is the other big piece that. Vietnam is actually the one developing country that's ahead of India in terms of solar. So India can teach Vietnam about solar parks, and Vietnam can teach India about rooftop solar. And that's where, we talked about time of day pricing and how solar is less valuable because it comes during the day. But for rooftop solar, it can actually be more valuable because it reduces the amount of transmission and distribution required. So I'd love to see let's say an APPC 3.85 feed-in tariff for solar. Maybe you adjust it downward for the time of day, you adjust it upward for the transmission and distribution benefit. You'd want to run those numbers to come up with the exact number, but I'd love to see that for the rooftop solar market.
I just want to add a couple of points to this conversation that we are having. I think I'm glad he mentioned the point rooftop solar. So if you look at all our established national targets, while on the utility scale we have achieved something, it's on the rooftop that we have really, really slipped and not met those targets. So that's one possible thing. The second thing is that all this conversation about solar always hinges on the PV element of it. We have attempted CSP, but not actually scaled it. Sometimes land efficiency with a CSP would make a much better sense. So I think those are the only two things that I want to add.
Just one point I want to make, and that's in CleanMax, we are trying to not do that. Today, we are looking at land for solar projects and the local community exclusive. I take a land and make a boundary around it and build a solar park there. What I'm actually really doing is I'm taking the livelihood out of the people who are living there. They might sell the land because of commercial considerations or whatever it is, but all said and done, it's not an inclusive effort towards the community. And the land, what have you done actually in that park? You have put the piling and the structures and the modules are above the ground. So you still have the land below the modules. So we are seriously contemplating on why not use this land to grow some crop or some herbs or few things which can easily be grown under it. And the local community which was earlier doing the agriculture there in the same land participate in this, and we get into a partnership with them. And we are really seriously now contemplating doing that, more so for us, because when we look at hybrid plants which are coming up in agriculturally rich areas, we don't want to lose out on that particular part of the, it's not from a revenue, surely I think it's a very commercially viable stuff, but the spin-off which it has on inclusiveness and the anger or the resent that the local community has in providing their land for such projects would surely reduce by this. So that's something we want to pilot it out very soon now. And I'm sure this is something even the other players can think about doing it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think excellent point made, excellent points made. Certainly, as you said, wasteland is something that should be explored more. Floating solar definitely, is one area which can, reduce the requirement for land, and India has a coastline, a significantly large one, where it can be used, plus, the ponds and rivers, etc. Also, CSP is a technology that was, once tried and now discarded. So, I mean, nobody talks about it as if it doesn't exist. So, it's definitely something worth exploring more. Agri PV, very interestingly, as you rightly said, is something definitely worth trying. Whether we have crops which can grow under PV or we have vertical PVs, whichever way, but integrating PV with agri and not requiring shift of land use from agri to solar is something that is definitely needed. A few more things like BIPV, building integrated PV. We've not done enough on that. Probably, that is something which can be explored more. Probably also having vertical PVs along large highways, metros, railway tracks. So those are some of the things which do not require land that much. It can be vertical or even horizontal in some cases. But again, we have large stretches of those, and I was discussing with Secretary MNRE also. So he's also very interesting in looking at PVs across the highways, across larger highways. So those are some of the things which can probably be tried more for obviating the land, scarcity. So thank you so much. I will move on. So another issue that I will just throw before opening the floor to for any questions is on financing. So is it really a challenge? Do you see adequate financing coming in? Are these projects? I mean, most of them are bankable, commercially viable. So I don't think that risk exists. Is there any risk in terms of offtake that you see? I mean, from DISCOM side. But leaving that apart, do you feel there are adequate financing available? Is there need for any additional products, instruments to leverage financing in the country? So any thoughts on that?
So once you have a kind of an investment product, as I say, in an asset, that the returns are more or less stable. So you talk about levered double-digit kind of IRRs. Then financing obviously becomes key, and bigger players obviously will have a competitive advantage. So we recently had an announcement, NTPC was raising yen-denominated bonds, or Renew was raising dollar-denominated bonds. So that's obviously, Government of India has a green bond, a sovereign green bond kind of a framework. All of that will affect the levered IRRs of a solar project. Simply changing from 70-30 to 80-20, 15 to 20-year debt, 100 basis point shift in terms of debt, all of that. But for example, even in the new GNA ISTS, you want a connectivity, you are supposed to hit financial closure within a specified timeline. Otherwise, there are penalties, or you lose your connectivity. So even that is, so FC becomes important. I don't think there is lack of capital. Most cases, the FCs would have CPs of offtake or visibility, because how does a lender size the cash flows in terms of the project cash flows, and how do you size the debt? So yes, that is a constraint, because unless you have, for that, as the market develops, as we heard, NTPC is also selling on the power exchange. If that becomes a credible alternative that the power exchange can absorb whatever is the output of a solar plant, I don't think why financing should be a constraint. The lenders, the mindset would change from a long 25-year PPA or a 15-year PPA to accepting the market as an alternative. And if that happens, I think financing should be available.
Yeah, I just wanted to make 3 points here. One is rules around pension funds. So I find ironic, I mean, I'm Canadian. You see Canadian pension funds investing in RE in India. But the rules around, that EPF and that PPF that comes out of your paycheck, that should be allowed to go to RE projects as well. But I agree with the general point that there's not an overall challenge with financing. But I do think there are specific subsegments. So this is, NTPC, for example, this MSC DCL tender, which is fantastically designed with solar plus storage. Exactly as Mr. Bhargava said, that's what DISCOMs need. But MSC DCL is a very bankable DISCOM. GU Vinel is a very bankable DISCOM. SECI is very bankable. So what I would love to see is NTPC get out of these tenders that the private sector is very happy to take. There's 7 bidders for that MSC DCL tender. If NTPC wasn't there, private money would have come in. On the other hand, you have certain DISCOMs, let's say in Bihar or Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh, which are less bankable. And so to me, that's the role for CPSUs like NTPC. Just like, the minister says, go build coal, the minister can say, go build solar and wind and sell to Bihar. And I'll give you a moment. The other... The last one that's missing is the rural areas, the SMEs and the small. So CleanMax, of course, can cater to the CNI, the large CNI customers, the well-rated customers. That's very well financed. That's very well established. But if you're a rice mill or a small business or a small manufacturer, CleanMax can't serve you. So how do we push, again, maybe it's the PSU banks to make rooftop lending. You know, in Germany, you go into a bank, you get a home loan. Would you like a solar rooftop loan with that? It's like a side of fries. I'd love to see PSU banks offer those loans to small and medium enterprises as well as individual homeowners.
Yeah, you must comment on that.
Want me to react on that? So I mean, Alexander, were you in consultancy earlier? Were you providing? So these are the kind of things consultants keep on saying, Somesh included, I know, PSU should do this and private should do this. The NTPC operates like any other commercial entity, and although we are owned by the government, as you know, why should I look only at Bihar and not look at Maharashtra? I mean, for your information, in any case, we did bid in Bihar. We have been bidding in Uttar Pradesh. We are doing projects in Uttar Pradesh. So for us, practically all the states are good. And I can only say that as NTPC, probably I have that advantage that I can, because I supply so much power to practically all the states in the country. So we are quite comfortable to bid in any state tender as long as I think the issue of land and connectivity is taken care of. So we have done that. And I don't see any reason. Private sector was very much there in the bidding in Maharashtra. They could have outbid us. They didn't because they didn't want to or they couldn't, I don't know. So it's always a competition between, and I've been told in a lighter vein that many private sector entities have actually complained to the government that you should not allow NTPC in many tenders because they don't let us win. I take that as a compliment, by the way. And I think one of the, the other panels we had about 2 days ago, I think one of the gentlemen said, why are you entering C&I? Leave something for us. So I said, why should I leave anything for anyone? If I have to do 60 gigawatts and maybe more in the next 10 years, I think you mentioned 150. I'm happy to take that number as long as things keep happening. I'm not saying 60 is a number we decided in our board. But if it becomes 75 or 80 and if we're able to get that traction on the ground, we are able to get that many panels on the ground or the windmills on the ground, we'll be happy to do much more. But I think one of the important points which did come up, finance to your question is not an issue as far as NTPC is concerned, but I believe that's not too much of an issue for anyone. The only difference between, if I may say so, between NTPC, for example, or any of the large player for that example, and a smaller player is that in many cases, for NTPC, we don't do project financing. So for us, it's never an issue in terms of raising finances. For the smaller players, maybe it's project financing, so they need to achieve financial closure, as I think you mentioned. But as long as there are secured PPAs with good off-takers, I think that's taken care of. I think quickly on one point, that is the storage part. I think you said CSP, and I think you also said CSP. CSP won't take off. Probably it's, the sell-by date has gone. I don't know. Maybe there might be some new technologies which do come around, which are not CSP, but storage. And at NTPC, we will be happy to talk to, discuss, and maybe part invest in any new storage technology which comes in cheap. Today, we are bound by the fact that it's either only battery or pump storage, because the growth of solar is quite very seriously linked now with the storage side, because we are not able to get power when we need, and which can happen only with storage. So that becomes very important. So whatever amount of solar we do, if we are not able to have it dispatchable, that becomes a problem. So we are quite happy to invest on storage. In fact, we are looking at 2 projects very cleanly. One is gravity-based storage, and the other one is part CSP, just for the information. But those are still under discussions. We are still, our team is actually evaluating these kind of things. So we'll be happy to take on these kind of projects further, but we believe that storage is going to play an important role, not necessarily battery, not necessarily PSP alone, but options which are scalable, which are reliable, and which are affordable.
So just a small bit here. I think my CFO has been able to get the money we need to build the project. So I think the money supply is surely there. But one element that what we normally don't discuss is the detailing and the depth of due diligence that the lenders have started doing on areas which are actually really not required to be done to that extent. And that's because many of our friends from the industries are either part of the lender community, the banks, and a lot of our consultants whom they engage. The kind of questioning they do, which actually make no, it's the risk element is so low, but I've seen weeks and months getting wasted in trying to satisfy those kind of queries. And ultimately the money does come in, but the time that get wasted for everybody is really humongous. I think this is something, if people in the audience are there who are sitting on that side of the fence, who want to lend money, might like to look into it as to what exactly are we trying to do here, you know? So that's something I just wanted to make a submission here.
Sure, sure. No, absolutely. Very interesting points. I think one area which still remains a little, constrained in terms of financing, if you talk of CNI segment, is the MSME. So I think, that's still a very large segment, but, maybe not so credit worthy and, which can attract enough capital or this. So that is something that we still need to talk about. And, I'm aware that government is trying to work out some financing mechanisms, instruments, to actually hedge that risk also for MSMEs, and probably we'll have something for that as well. So I'm conscious of the time, so we just have just 2 minutes left formally for the session. So I'll stop at that, and if there are any questions in the audience, maybe 2 or 3 questions, we would be happy to take that. So I see a hand there, gentlemen. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Rahul Taparia. I head strategy at DCM Shriram. So we are one of the CNI consumers that you guys would be willing to sell power to at CleanMax. I have 2 questions, one for you, Mr. Verma, and one for Mr. Bhargava. So for Mr. Verma, we didn't actually speak a lot about technology in solar. So my question is that since land is a major constraint and irradiation has to be married to the land to make it viable, do you see any technological development in the next 1 or 2 years which will increase the CUF to 21, 22% or even beyond? So that's one. And one for Mr. Bhargava is, you spoke about solar today at 2.5 to 2.6 rupees a unit, right? With the solar rates coming down again after the irregularities in the last year or so, do you see it coming down again to the level of, let's say, 2.1, 2.2 rupees a unit as a developer? That's it.
Yeah, thank you. So see, technological upgradation is an ongoing process which will continue in any case. We're already seeing people moving away from P-type modules to N-type modules, which are more efficient. And the sizes of the modules are also going up now, which make the overall farm little more efficient in terms of this. What I have seen from the experience that I have in operating plant, I think the quality of construction is absolutely very important here, which really impacts the overall long-term performance of the plant, the kind of cables we use and the kind of workmanship that what we do. And that is really not been the focus so far is what I have seen. Because most of the time it is the EPCs who construct the plant, sign it off, move away, and then somebody owns it. But in CleanMax, it's our own home. So when I want to build my own home, I'll ensure I go and buy the best cement and the best steel. And that approach has to be done by every person who's into this industry. It's not just build and forget and move away and then somebody takes over it. Then trackers, surely obsolete. So those technologies are already existing in terms of using bifacial modules are already available now. But that depends on, it can't be used everywhere, where you have more reflection from the ground, like more in Rajasthan. So we are also planning to use those wherever the technology allows. And we are confident that as more brains get applied to this, we will surely see some more transformational path-breaking stuff coming out. But today I don't see anything, at least in the near-term horizon, which is really going to change the things to that level that what you're expecting at the moment. Thank you.
I can probably quickly add one point here. There is also a lot of work going on in terms of improving the module efficiency. So from where we are, monoperk, bifacial, of course, you mentioned. Now we're talking about HJT and all that, which potentially, and then of course perovskite, so which potentially could raise the module efficiency to say around 25%. But it's all based on secondary information because we are not the R&D guys. In any case, we are the users. But if that happens, but the other point of CUF, that is already high. I mean, because with the kind of DC overloading we guys are doing all over the country, so we already have a CUF of close to 30% now. So CUF is not an issue. It's how lesser modules we can use to achieve that CUF. On the tariff part, I leave that to guys like Somesh who do a lot of crystal ball gazing, and they can give you ideas what's going to happen, and then come out very clearly wrong over the next 2 years also. I mean, one very good example, not Somesh, is BNEF. I think all of us track BNEF reports for storage, and I keep asking those guys, they said in 2 years, battery would be so cheap, and battery is actually equally costlier now. Now they're trying to justify why that has happened. So that's the kind of work these guys do very well. So I'm not a crystal ball gazer in any case. But I mean, we all know it's all linked to the pricing, module pricing. So if genuinely the module prices do become but having said that, I must say 250 is a reasonable price. I mean, we try to be sometimes very ambitious when we say 2 rupees, 180 and all those kind of numbers. We probably need to be more practical. I mean, suddenly if you start saying that all these vegetables will come to 1 rupee a kilo, that's being, I would say, hopeful, wishful and all that, but let's be honest. So I don't know where to go. For us, 250, 240 is a reasonable price in terms of the input cost, which makes it good for us also as a developer, and which makes it reasonably okay for the buyers.
I just want to make a quick add on that 250 note. If you have 250 solar, you combine that with wind and storage, you can get to about 4 rupees per kilowatt hour for round the clock power. So it's still cheaper than new coal. And that's even with, well, we can debate that later. But the other issue, I mean, storage, one of the reasons is the taxes are so high. Like now, sodium sulfur storage is 28% GST. Lithium ion is 18% versus coal is only 5%. So if you were to equalize the tax rates, you'd actually see RE plus storage come down. But I agree with Mr. Bhargava's point that we should stop hoping for solar to keep coming down and say at 2.5, when combined with wind and storage, it's cheap enough. We need to start focusing on deploying rather than waiting.
Module. This is Debojyoti from Grid Controller of India. I'm Chief Manager, Market Operation, and looking after the regulatory affairs. So it was a wonderful, candid discussion, I would say. I have 3 questions, but to begin, the first question I would like to quote from German philosopher Hegel. One of my German friends is also there. He has once said that we have learned, one thing we have surely learned from history, that we do not learn from history. So, to begin with, I would like to highlight that one jigsaw puzzle I felt that was missing in the discussion was about the recovery of the wastes that is going to be from the solar. It is estimated that if we incorporate around 300 gigawatt of solar in 2030, around 35,000 metric tons of solar waste will be there. And as IRNE report highlights that it will be around 15 billion worth of recoverable solar material will be there. Just going to be on landfill or something if it is not planned properly. So one of my questions will be how we are estimating to create a kind of a circular economy around the solar. And incidentally, the blue circle logo is also highlighting kind of a circular circle. The blue economy itself highlights the circularity of economy. And then second, my question is, there is a various concerns over the PPA offtakes among the DISCOMS and the solars. And one of the major reasons that has been highlighted that the intermittency cost is not properly attributed to the solar. And regarding that, there are various discussions across the world, European Union and other countries are also exploring, like National Grid in US, where basically they are considering these firm power auctions. Like MECDCL wants a kind of peak power support, they want a kind of a firm power commitment. And in that, Power Ministry had recently come up with a kind of RE bundling scheme that has not yet kick-started, where basically the thermal plants along with the solar plants will have a kind of a packaged scheduling, where basically thermal plants will help out the solar plants to cater their intermittency by incorporating a firm schedule, like a standardized product kind of a thing. You will not be facing that intermittency. So from Bhargav sir, I would like to get into that, how this RE bundling can move into the future. And then my last question is about the communitization of the solar parks that has been rightly pointed out, how that can be done. And not only the agricultural land, the communitization, because once you communitize, it can, the urban landscape, like bus terminus, the shades and those things, also the garages and all, there are multiple things. So how the planning of communitization of solar parks and the solar energy, making it as presence in our everyday routine, can be incorporated. Thank you.
3 questions. Waste management. It's an interesting.
I would like to talk about the waste. ISA, we recently just started a program on waste. I think this is still very much a work in progress. You know, in Europe, you have these extended producer responsibilities. I think it's a bit, I think luckily we have time. You know, the Indian solar mission started in 2012. These panels have a lifetime of 20 years. We're getting some experience with processing them in terms of the ones that are broken or prematurely been retired. And I was just talking to a recycler the other day that was saying 95 to 98% can be recovered. So it is possible. Right now, the primary issue is cost. So in Europe, the EPR has basically added to the cost. I think I'm optimistic that these various working groups, technical working groups, improved, enhanced recovery methods, chemical, physical, thermal, as soon as we can hit break even, then a lot of these problems goes away. If the value of the recovered materials is equal to the cost of recycling, then it makes it a bunch easier. And we're not there yet, so we still need some technical innovation to get there.
Hopefully by the time we reach that problem, we will have a solution.
Probably we'll have an industry like Alang in Gujarat. Well, India probably will lead this whole recycling, and I think 98% recovery is a good stuff to do. And second thing we need to understand, there is no sunset as such. The manufacturer doesn't say after 20 years or 25 years the panel is going to fall down on the ground or the power is going to become zero. So it's not the case. You will still have a solar farm which is operating at 80% of its rated capacity, and you have already recovered all the investment on it. What's the problem in letting it continue and generate for some more years? So I think that's what I see. Crystal gazing further, that's going to happen. We are not going to have situations where you're going to uproot the entire solar farm because it's finished its life cycle. We probably have a cheaper PPA, we'll be able to sell it cheap. You look at what the wind farms today are. There are so many wind farms, smaller wind farms. Repowering has been discussed for ages now, but really no serious repowering has happened because those turbine owners are happy with what they have today. That's also, and I don't want to get into repowering wind because that's not the agenda today. Yeah. Sure. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm conscious of time, so just a brief comment. Yeah, sir.
Yeah. So Debjyoti, you're already aware of the scheme, I'm sure, no? That flexibility scheme which the government has notified. So, yeah, it has been under discussion for almost 2 years now. So I think the first notification came out about 2 years ago, but there were issues on the regulatory side as well as the dispatchability side, and we have discussed with the Ministry of Power, CA, grid controller, you call yourself now earlier POSOCO, and CRC. So what has happened now that government has notified a revised version of that scheme, which is probably much more easy to do and take forward, much more practical, although there's still some minor changes to be ironed out. But one of the important things there is that the price has to be discovered through a bid process. So that process has started in the case of NTPC also and in the case of DVC also. In fact, we are also one of the bidders there. So what I understand, maybe this month end or early next month, the bids would be conducted. But you need to keep in mind that there's at least 18 months for those projects to actually become operational. So actual flexibility will probably start 18 to 20 months down the line. And of course, the other important thing is that the solar tariff should be lower than the ECR. So that's the crux of the matter in any case.
Thank you, sir. Your third question around communitization. Sorry, I didn't get that very well. If anybody of you got it, or maybe, yeah.
I think he probably meant how do we how do we make use of solar all around us, like he said, probably you have a bus stand which has solar, and I think we discussed that during our panel discussion. That point came up on how buildings can have solars integrated and structures can have solar integrated. I think we're already moving in that direction, so that's already there.
Okay, thank you. Probably just two last questions. Gentlemen, the red, yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Dhari Gupta. I'm founder of Earthride. We are into leasing of electric two-wheelers, right? So, and everyone knows that growth for electric vehicles in India will come from two-wheelers and three-wheelers, not so from cars so much. So we have seen like in Tesla, you can power your home with Tesla. So I was wondering if we can use kind of these electric two-wheelers, which will be 25% of all two-wheelers sold by 2025, can they be used for distributed storage? And also, can we use in integration with the rooftop solar, can they be used as a distributed storage where the person is not looking at the exact ROI just from that project because he is using the two-wheeler, plus rooftop solar is getting some revenue, right? So how about that, like distributed storage and generation using rooftop solar and electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers?
Yeah. So I think you're talking about the vehicle to grid kind of technology. Yeah, V2G. So I think there is still, I mean, from an international example, maybe you can throw some light. But in India, we've not seen any pilot or commercial viability of that being established as of now, I suppose.
Yeah, so ISA does have a program on electric solar charging, electric vehicles. This is exactly what we're trying to promote. In India, the big barrier to adoption is time of day pricing, right? We only have a plus minus 10%. Whereas you see in countries like Australia, where you have power that's 5 rupees during the day because you have so much solar, as my colleague mentioned, and 25 rupees or 25 cents in the evening. So, you look at the MSC DCL tender, where it's 9 rupees for peak power and 2.44 rupees for daytime power. So as soon as you get time of day pricing, you'll see that the technology is well understood. The V2G is there, vehicle to grid, but as we need a framework to incentivize it and to compensate people for providing that service.
I think you practically covered it. So V2G guidelines, I believe, are under discussions in the government. In fact, in one of the meetings, we were also there. So that's very actively being considered. But there are regulations which need to be put in place. TOD definitely, time of the day is definitely one of the pieces. The other, of course, is the net metering, where, I mean, if you guys are aware, there's been a huge pushback from the states. They're not very keen to very easily agree to net metering because very rightly they are losing money on that. So there's no denying that. So, but V2G definitely will take care of a lot of storage requirements as and when it happens.
No, absolutely. V2G is a very, very promising technology and, offering storage, at no additional cost. But a whole ecosystem, the regulatory framework needs to be built for that. So I think that is in process. So should happen sometime soon, I guess. Okay, one last question.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'm Surendra Singla from 5M Energy Private Limited. We are solar consultant and energy auditor. I have no question, but I would like to, as you have beautifully covered all the challenges, whether it is the land or the inefficiency or the production of, it's a need of the hour that we have to do backward integration. Lot of plant, we all know that we have passed through from 2013, how we have developed the solar. So a lot of inefficiencies, plants are existing. Being ex-NTPC, I would like to address Mohit, my dear friend, that you come forward, whatever the existing plants are there, kindly make it efficient because it is already blocking lot of land. And as we know, all these challenges which we have discussed, it's a process, it will take time. We have lot of resources, lot of infrastructure is there, need of the hour, that all the existing plants need to be run in an efficient condition. So I think NTPC should come forward to address this issue.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I think we'll note that comment. So thank you. Ma'am, would you like to ask? So that's the last question. Please go ahead. Can we have the mic here, please?
Thank you for allowing me to ask the last question. I'm Archana Biswal from Kinanagal. I'm into an industrial vertical and recently taken over renewable as a vertical for our organization. So we are putting a lot of focus on renewable energy, and solar is the major one. So thanks for sharing the constraints and challenges and what we foresee by 2032 and what we are aiming at. So I just want to ask, what are your thoughts regarding the supply chain? How can we contribute? We do have ideas, but then what do you think on this part, both for domestic manufacturers and the imports?
Yeah, I think a lot has been said in terms of supply chain. So maybe, just in the interest of time, not undermining your question, probably we'll discuss offline if you. Yeah, if you can quickly say. A few
So
words.
I can pitch it for him. You can actually engage these guys. They will help you
Thank you,
with
Mr.
whatever
Mohit.
reports you want.
Thank you.
One very last quick comment on that. I mean, R&D is another area. So for solar, for example, just signed an agreement with IIT Madras to do research there. Love to see more collaborations like that, where universities in India and industry collaborate on manufacturing R&D. India has the most scientists and engineers in the world. It's time to put them to use on solar.
Sure. So I think, I would like to stop with that. We have already overshot by 17 minutes. So thank you so much for being a great audience, and thank you to all my panelists. I think, solar is, we all agree is the most promising technology in renewables. There are challenges, nevertheless, but, we still see a lot of enthusiasm. The challenges are not so big or not big enough to actually curtail or push us down or pull us down. So, I still see us, being able to go ahead with full steam and meet the capacity that the government has laid for ourselves. So, thank you so much, and over to you, Gautam.